Shadows occupy our personal landscape. And when I say personal landscape, I mean our minds, our hearts, our whole being. There was a time in deeper history when the word shadow had a very different meaning from the one it has today. A shadow is always attached to something that is real. So should one appear without any substance, then what did that actually mean? Shadows have long been considered to infiltrate what we are and what we have. So are we still victim to the shadows that menace our lives? Is there anything more uncomfortable than the shadow? She likes wandering in the forest to her grandma's home. How she loves this sleepy forest. If you see your shadow draped across the floor of a room or the ground as you're walking along, where the sun or a light of some kind is causing that shadow, we tend to not to really think of it as anything problematic. But there was a time in deeper history when the word shadow meant something ugly, something quite unsavoury, something that was dangerous to you because it was something that was influencing you and attracting you to do something you wouldn't normally do that was within your own personal character. I've thought a lot about the idea of shadows because I used to teach people how to manage shadows within themselves and shadows within other people. And mostly it focused around how to deal with obnoxious or toxic people when they came into your vicinity and they started to play games with you, take you for a ride, mess with your head or your heart, cause you to feel very differently about yourself, feel that you weren't worthy, feel that you didn't have a lot to give to anything. So the whole effect was kind of making you shrink away. And a lot of the exercises we used to do in earlier days was to manage this whenever it happened. Now, I've already done something about toxic relationships and how to manage them, but there's a big story behind this. We're all quite familiar with the term narcissistic abuse these days, and narcissism. It's quite rife everywhere. Everyone knows what it means now. And this is where shadows come into play, as they used to a long time ago. We didn't use the term narcissistic abuse years ago when we were practicing these theatre role-playing exercises. We were more inclined to use terms like dominant, menacing, dictatorial, and shadow. It means a power takeover. It means imposing something upon your good nature or taking you somewhere you do not want to go so that you exhibit some kind of weakness, meaning that the person who is taking you for the grand ride can exercise their need for feeding off you. I suppose there's no other way to put it. And if we think about this, we come into the idea of vampirism or something where you have no life in you, so you've got to find it in other people and actually feed off their good nature so that you get some kind of sustenance coming your way. Most of us are going to be familiar with this. But I think it's important to put it in context with the idea of the shadow and how it's been prevalent in communities over many thousands of years, so that we can realise that it is a problem. And is it still a problem today? Well, it would seem so, yes. The reason why I like to say shadows old and young is because earlier shadows would have been far more simple. You would have got somebody who maybe had a crazy dream and they're reacting to it, and they might be running around in circles, and then they might become a bit odd in their behaviour. And so it was up to the local medicine man to probably put this person back together again. It probably happened less in much earlier times than it would now. Now, when we have people exerting themselves upon us and doing a power takeover, if you like, it's far more complex. And that's largely because it's far more subtle. We're not permitted, you could say it's politically incorrect, to challenge somebody on their behaviour, because we automatically feel that it's ourselves who have the problem. It's quite common that. Because if you've been rolling along with somebody who's really quite good to you, in fact, most narcissistic people will put you up on a pedestal before they quickly remove it. So if you've been going along like that with somebody and then suddenly you get some strange behaviour showing itself and somebody acting odd or weirdly with you, you don't feel obliged to point it out to them or to talk about it, because it doesn't seem to be appropriate to do in our current society. You can't get your sword out and say, look, you've been mean to me, let's go and fight this out. So it's far more subtle today, the way we communicate with each other. So when I say shadows old and young, the earlier shadows are probably much more in your face. You could see what was wrong with somebody. Now it's some sort of mishmash of all kinds of ideas and influences and things that we imagine about ourselves and about other people. Our minds are so full of all kinds of abstract things. I think this is the nature of the modern or young shadow, that it's abstract, it's complex, it drives a hard bargain to get us to understand what is going on. So we're at a loss as to how to deal with it. It may sound crazy, but I think the young shadows hide behind the old shadows, and the civilized shadows hide behind the primitive shadows. The shadow world isn't what it used to be, but that could sound like I'm saying that the original shadow world was far better than the modern shadow world. But perhaps that's true. Perhaps the simple world we once occupied became the complex world, so that the complex world becomes something we were never meant to accommodate or manage. So we now find ourselves with a loss of a shadow world that we could actually once understand. Remember, substance creates shadow, only substance. So if someone's behaviour is without substance, in other words, behaviour without good reason, then shadow must be at work. The shadows are there, they're still there, and I like to call them shadows because it's a very age-old concept. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that in losing the awareness of the shadow world, we're losing a vital part of our ancient makeup, and that could actually prove dangerous to our health and well-being. Shadows are an integral part of our human makeup. You could, in fact, say that we need them. I do believe that shadows of the modern kind of the complex kind, the more abstract kind, appeared more regularly when we became civilized. That is, when we developed towns, cities, governments, when we moved out of simple tribal life, when we went into vast numbers of people to be managed and put into order, into categories, and we had class and we had systems coming out of our ears that we had to pay homage to. I think everything's got worse from that perspective, simply because there's far too much going on within us and around us. And when you've got complex society, as we have, you've also got complex thinking, complex behaviour, complex strategies that people put into place. And it's easy to hide behind a power takeover if you want to. Most easy. And of course, when you think of the word shadow, a shadow, you can't get hold of a shadow. You can't get it into your hand. You try and catch your own shadow. Try chasing it down the road. You'll never catch it. So it's an appropriate word in many ways, because narcissistic takeovers are all very subtle, all very abstract. They're all quite hidden sometimes, so that by the time you realise what's happening to you, you've been clunked on the head and you're quite numb and shocked about it, and you don't actually know what's going on. So I think the word shadow is quite appropriate. Give this a little thought. Ask me some questions about it if you wish. I'm always open to questions. Make comments. That'll be great. Okay, I'll leave you with that now, and see you again soon. She likes wandering